There are two groups of people when it comes to Invicta watches. This is either a budget watch made to look like a Submariner but with a Seiko movement and what's not to love about that, or it's a cheap watch devoid of any originality and regarded by many as a joke. This is the Invicta Pro Diver Automatic model number 29177. At the time of this video, you can pick up this model at Joma Shop for $79. Amazon has it for $87, and the Invicta website sells it for $99 US. Now keep in mind, there are numerous versions of this watch, different sizes, colors, bracelets, automatics, even a quartz version. Chances are you could find a Pro Diver for less money, especially if you picked it up used or if you went for the quartz version. Hey everyone, welcome back to Eric's Everyday Watches. As always, if you like this video, if you find it helpful, please do me a favor, hit the like button and consider subscribing. So I had mixed feelings about getting this watch. I actually put off even considering it for a long time. I am one of those people who immediately said no thank you, simply because of the engraving on side of the case. But the more I talked with people, the more I started to understand the appeal. And I was kind of reminded that the watch, or any watch for that matter, is only part of the equation. And the person who buys it and where they are on their personal watch collecting journey and what they are looking to get out of a watch, that is just as important. No, actually that's wrong. It's more important because not every watch is for every person. Now usually I'll jump right into talking about the specs of a watch, but I think it's worth skipping ahead here and sharing with you who I think this watch is actually for. If you are new to watch collecting and you're considering this for your first automatic diver, or if you're looking for an expensive looking watch but you don't want to have to worry about banging it up or dinging it, or if you're looking for an inexpensive way to get into watch modding, or if you're simply looking for a watch with a decent build quality, solid specs, has one of the most popular automatic movements from a brand with a long history, and that it's well under $100. In fact, this is one of the cheapest automatic dive watches with 200 meters of water resistance on the market. Now, it's definitely not for everyone, and as I said, it depends on what you personally are looking for in a watch. Now, let's get on to the review. The case construction here is stainless steel with a diameter coming in at 42 millimeters, not including the crown. On the side, we have a lug-to-lug distance of 50 millimeters and an overall thickness of 14 millimeters. Now, I've heard some people mention that this is a thick watch at 14 millimeters and that putting it on a double pass NATO makes it stand off your wrist that much more. Personally, I've only worn this on the supplied bracelet, but I did not find the thickness to be an issue. In fact, for this style of watch, I thought it sat down well on my 7-inch wrist. Now, if the thickness is an issue for you, keep in mind there is a thinner quartz version available. Now, like a lot of watch companies, Invicta is sourcing most of the parts for this watch from China and then assembling it in Malaysia. There's nothing wrong with that, it just explains how they can offer this watch for so little. There is also no water pressure testing going on. Again, it's a way to keep costs down. The top of the case has a brushed finish to it, and quite honestly, I was expecting it to be a lot more coarse. While it could be finer, it is not something that jumps out to you as being overly cheap or poor quality. It is the finishing that I expect on an $80 watch. The direction of the brushing on the case does not match the direction of the brushing on the bracelet, and as a result, the two can sometimes appear a slightly different color. Now, this is a pet peeve of mine, and I would have preferred Invicta to have been consistent here. Now, putting my personal preferences aside, what does jump out to me is the fact that the bracelet does not sit flush with the top of the lugs. The bracelet sits roughly 2 millimeters lower, and I can definitely feel the edge where the two meet when I run my finger over it. It's a reminder that this is an $80 watch, not an $800 watch. On the side of the case, we have a high polished finish, and that dual finish is kind of impressive given the fact that this is an $80 watch. Now the downside is that, it's a total fingerprint magnet. On the other side of the case, we see Invicta engraved, and I gotta admit, this is done more tastefully than I expected it to be. I had visions of it being larger and making me feel as if I was renting out advertising space on my wrist to Invicta, but at least on this model, it is somewhat restrained. Now, I would have preferred it not to have been at all, but it is what it is. Overall, the fits and finish on this watch seems okay. It's not great, but at the same time, it's not terrible. There are no sharp edges or corners here. Moving on to the back of the watch, we have a screw-down exhibition case back with text that reads all stainless steel, water resistant 200 meters, the model number, and of course, Invicta. And inside that case, as I mentioned before, we have one of the most popular automatic movements, the NH35A, with the addition of some added flair by Invicta, the yellow color router. Now it's nice to see a little extra pizzazz here since we have an exhibition window. And again, it's kind of impressive given the price point. Now the NH35A is a solid workhorse of a movement, and it's why so many people prefer it. It has 24 joules, beats at 21,600 beats an hour, has a 41-hour power reserve, it does hand wind, and it does hack. Now it's rated at a -20 to +40 seconds a day. Now another way that Invicta keeps the cost down is that they do not regulate the movements before it leaves the factory. Now I haven't heard of many people complaining online about the accuracy of this watch, but it could be regulated. This movement is also repairable, but given the low price point, you would probably opt to replace the entire watch rather than to pay someone to repair it if you ever do have an issue. Now at the 3 o'clock position, we have a signed crown, and that is approximately 7.5 millimeters in width and 5 millimeters in depth. Now this is a screw down crown, so you will need to unscrew it before you can hand wind it. Setting the time is a simple matter of pulling it out to the first position to set the date, pulling it out to the second position, hacks the second hand, and sets the time. Moving on to the face of the watch, this is a looker for sure, but none of that credit actually goes to Invicta. This is, of course, an homage watch, and that is something that either appeals to you or it simply doesn't. In the bigger picture, many, if not most, dive watches seem to be influenced by either the Submariner or the 50 Fathoms. It's just a matter of to what degree. Now, starting on the outside of this watch, we have a unidirectional 120 click stainless steel bezel with an aluminum insert. It is easy to grip and turn and has a satisfying audible click to it. There's good action on the bezel with no backplay, and it does align nicely. We also have a small lume pip at the 12 o'clock position. Inside of that, we have a white minute track printed directly on the dial, and further in, we have round metallic indices surrounding the dial with the exception of the rectangle markers at the 6 and 9 o'clock positions, and a downward pointing triangle at the 12 o'clock. Also at the 12 o'clock position, we have the Invicta logo applied in a metallic treatment, matching the hands and the indices. Further down the dial, at the 6 o'clock position, we find the words automatic, professional, and 200 meter water resistant. The date window at the 3 o'clock position is white on black and amplified by a Cyclops window. Now personally, those are not my thing, but I do have to admit that it makes reading the date a breeze. The date window has a thin metallic outline to it, which does help it make it feel integrated with the other elements going on the dial. The dial itself is a flat black color and offers plenty of contrast against the hands and the indices. The minute hand extends all the way to the edge of the minute track. The green second hand also extends nicely to the minute track, and I appreciate how the lollipop aligns with the round indices when it passes over. On the back side of that second hand, we have the winged logo acting as a counterbalance. I know not everyone likes that winged counterbalance, but in my everyday use, I found it's really not something I notice very often. The biggest gripe I hear by far about this watch is the poor lume, and I have to admit, it did not pass my everyday lume test. I wore this all day, left it by my bedside table, looked over at 4 in the morning, and I was unable to read the time. That is my everyday lume test. Ironically, I was able to see the indices, but the lume on my hands was too poor and I could not tell what time it was. The bracelet that comes with this watch is 22 millimeters wide at the lugs and tapers down to 20 millimeters at the clasp. It has solid links with hollow end links. As I mentioned before, the bracelet does not sit flush with the top of the lugs. The outer links have been given a brushed finish, with the inner links a high polish. Now the Pro Diver is available with various bracelet options, depending on which model you choose. I went for this one simply out of aesthetics, and visually I have to admit, it looks great. I love the mostly brushed finish with just a bit of high polished flair in the middle. The links are rounded on top and seem to give the overall look of being more dynamic in my opinion. Now that's not to say this bracelet is without its faults. In fact, the bracelet is one of the areas that I hear people complain about. Sure, it's a bit jangly, and that's also due in part to the style of the bracelet. And if you fold the links back upon themselves, you'll see how it could use better articulation. But that's not something you're actually going to do on a day-to-day basis. My biggest gripe with this bracelet is the clasp. I find that the fold over safety is too stiff and it's difficult to open. I always wonder if I'm going to end up ripping off one of my fingernails trying to open the clasp. Another small gripe is the size of the logo on the clasp. It could have been done a little smaller and a little more tasteful in my opinion. Now inside the clasp we have your basic pressed scissor section. Now on the plus side, this clasp does have 4 micro adjustments. And again, the bracelet is a 22 millimeter bracelet, so swapping out a different bracelet or even a NATO strap should be an easy task. Overall, I can't knock this bracelet too much given the price point. It has solid links and it does look the part. And that seems to be the overall theme for this watch. Good looks paired with decent specs at a great price. So let's go over the specs for this watch. We got a mineral crystal, the NH35A movement, a diameter of 42 millimeters, a thickness of 14 millimeters, a lug width of 22 millimeters, a lug-to-lug distance of 50 millimeters, and a water resistance of 200 meters. And finally, let's wrap up by going over the pros and cons. For pros, aesthetics. Now, Invicta did not come up with this design, but it is still a good looking watch. You get 200 meters of water resistance, it is highly legible, you get that workhorse of a movement, the NH35, and it does have an exhibition case back, so you can take a peek inside the engine room. Now for cons, the bracelet. I personally found the clasp a little difficult to open. And originality. Now this is a homage watch, and that alone is going to turn some people off. So my final thoughts on this watch. Now I am surprised to be on this side of the view and saying that I found myself liking this watch more than I expected to. I just don't need it in my collection. Now if you're used to the quality of watch that typically costs a couple $100s or more, this is not going to blow you away. And if you're looking for this to compete with an Orient or Seiko dive watch, I don't think you're going to be impressed with the fit and finish here. But if you have a budget of $80 or, if you shop around, you can find this for a lot less, I do think that this is a good option for someone who's adding a first automatic watch to their collection or someone who simply wants an expensive looking watch to use as a daily beater. This has been Eric from Eric's Everyday Watches, reminding you to buy the watch that you love and don't pay any attention to what anybody else says or thinks. This is your watch collection. If you like this video, if you find it helpful in any way, please do me a favor, hit the like button and consider subscribing. I'll see you in the next video.